Hello, LIBA 301 Section 3 students. I'm recording this lecture on Monday, February 10th, and I want to offer again my apologies for mixing up my class schedule and missing class today. I can honestly say that has never happened to me before, so I want to apologize to you up front for that. I also want to make sure that you are not being that you're getting the information that you need to make sure that you can write your first paper effectively and not have any additional stressors other than the stress of writing the paper itself. So the three things I mentioned in the email that I sent out, one is that I would be recording this video, which I'm doing now, and my intent here is to kind of go over a few things. I think some key points that the authors of this textbook are making regarding summarizing effectively and quoting effectively, and I think we can garner a lot from the titles of the chapters. And the art of summarizing, the art of quoting, the authors are implying that it's not just something that is inherent to what we can do and what we've learned to do, but it's something that we need to practice. It's an art form that we need to practice and make sure that we get a better understanding of. So I think some of the stuff that I'm going to cover here, which my intent was to cover in class today, I'm going to cover in the video here, and I'll talk a little bit more about the other options that are open to and on the table for you to get the information this week. Before I dive into this any further, though, I want to make sure that everyone's aware that the first writing assignment is based on Charles Murray's work out of this textbook, out of the readings. It begins on page 344, and then you are being asked to respond to the question, the prompt number 2 at the end of that chapter. And I'll post the prompt up on Canvas, and I'll send an email out with the prompt as well. But I just wanted to make sure that you understand what it is that you have to do. Later on in this video, I'm going to speak to the very minute details of the paper so that you can be, be sure to know everything that'll be expected of you for this first writing assignment. Okay. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive into this. So I'm going to kind of go over a couple of chapters. I'm going to flip back and forth some screens here. I grabbed some screenshots, and I'm going to go over some of those things. And I've also put a link in here today that I'm not sure if you saw it yet or not, but this is a page that I created. This is under the Some Helpful Starting Documents. I moved it up to right under the Socrative attendance login in the hopes that you would see it. Quoting effectively is the page, and what I put in here basically are a couple things, and we're going to jump into this. I'm going to go over summarization. We're going to jump into this and kind of go over some of these things and some information that I grabbed from the Purdue OWL website as well, and I did put the link for that here, which will take you to the page where I got all of this information down here and then some. Okay, all right, so I'll be going back and forth with this in a Word document, as I said, where I grabbed some screenshots. So just to kind of go over it, and I'm going to read a little bit from the book, so if I'm not making eye contact with the screen, that's why. But if you recall, we talked about a couple times now with the class, the authors of the textbook are making the statement, they made a bold statement, that all academic writing should be in response to what others are saying. Okay, if that is true, there's something really foundational that we need to make sure that we do, and that is that we need to make sure that we summarize. And so this chapter 2 starts out, and I'll read it. If it is true, as we claim in this book, that to argue persuasively you need to be in dialogue with others, then summarizing others' arguments is central to your arsenal of basic moves. Okay, that is a pretty bold statement, and I think as a writer myself, that kind of puts a lot of pressure on us as writers, because my experience is typically this with writing. There are some people who summarize way too much. In other words, it's like their entire paper is simply a summarization of the source. Okay. The other thing is you have on the opposite end of the spectrum is writers who shy away from summarizing at all. So the Graf and Birkenstein and Durst give us some typical reasons why that might happen. Well, why summarize too much? Well, somebody may summarize too much because they don't really want to. Maybe they think they don't have anything better to say than what the author of that particular piece had to say. Well, they're experts in this field and they did it so well. That is true, but remember, the writing as we're looking at it now for this course, and as should carry over into your capstone, should be writing conversational. So what do we know, again, about the basics of communication? It's two ways or more, okay? So it's not just all one person's voice, it's both. So that's what this writing is all about. There's got to be some of those ends of the spectrum where you don't summarize at all or you summarize the entire paper. There's got to be a middle ground there. That middle ground is kind of that nice balance between the voice of Charles Murray and your own voice. Okay, so the authors kind of elaborate on some of the reasons why, which I think are kind of important. The document that I sent out to you earlier, there's a question posed in particular to this issue. I'd like for you to try to answer it. I already answered one piece for you. I'd like for you to try to answer the other piece of that as well. So give it a shot on your own. See if you can figure it out. And also think about for yourselves, what has led you to either summarize too much or not enough, okay? Or to avoid summary altogether, in fact, okay? So here's this slide. Good summaries, they summarize carefully. Make sure that you listen to what your source is really saying, because if we're going to use others' words, we need to make sure that we're representing them correctly. Okay. If you're having a conversation, if you and I were having a conversation and we were talking about John Smith, we wouldn't want to put things that John Smith said out of context. And to be fair to him, we have to make sure that we are summarizing his views on the issue correctly. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, you got to make sure that you understand your source. That is a primary objective there. Make sure you understand your source. This is why I think it's so important that when you get into writing bigger assignments, your capstone, that your sources that you use, you really should have some interest in them and to be able to understand them. You can go out and find really good research articles that are giving you a summarization of research done, but you may not be able to understand how to interpret the statistics. So is that going to do you any good? Most likely not, unless you can get some help from someone on how to interpret those. So in short, the issue is make sure you can understand the sources that you're using. Okay. And then again, the other thing, don't put words in your source's mouth, in fairness to them and to make sure that you come across valid. If somebody starts reading through your paper and you make a claim about Charles Murray that isn't true or isn't an accurate portrayal of his claims, that's going to weaken your argument significantly. Okay, so that's pretty much the emphasis of chapter 2 in summarizing. But there are a couple of things I just want to read out here through the textbook as well. So as a general rule, a good summary requires balancing what the original author is saying, again, with the writer's own focus. So having that balancing act between Murray's voice and your voice coming through. Okay, keep that in mind because I'm going to be grading heavily on that in this first paper. I'm looking for the voice. I'm looking to make sure that you are conveying Murray's views and claims and integrating with your own. Okay, and again, I think if you get in the mindset of thinking about this as a conversation, it may be helpful. Okay, how do we do that sometimes? Well, if you really want to truly get to understand somebody else, you may have done this in your personal lives, maybe in a relationship with somebody, maybe that person is having some problems. Well, what's one way that you can get to understand their problems is you can kind of, like that old saying, walk a mile in that person's shoes. Try to see what they're going through from their point of view. Okay, I think it's going to be helpful. It's going to help you to understand the writing a bit better, to understand where the author's coming from, and to then be able to, if you're going to counter that with your own view that maybe is different from Murray's, it'll give you a better stance and a better trajectory to do that. Okay. All right. So again, I'm going to read another piece here. This is very key to the first writing assignment. So the summary in the first paragraph, okay, succeeds because it points in two directions at once. So you're going to use these templates. Remember, Murray claims this, however, I believe this, or my view is this. So you're bringing in Murray and yours. So your thesis statement should be some kind of response, summarizing Murray's overall view in the first paragraph, and then making a claim. Although Murray contends that too many people are going to college, I disagree because X, because blank. Okay, so that is really creating that kind of balance right up front in your intro paragraph. And again, the thesis statement should be in that form of they say, I say. He says, I say. So Murray says this, I say this. Okay. Okay. Looking for that definite thesis statement, looking that you can bring in Murray in the intro paragraph, his kind of overall view of what it is that he's talking about, and then your thesis statement, which should be some response to Murray's work. Okay. The other thing that I think is really important in chapter 2 is to kind of avoid this mundane list summary. And I mentioned this in class last week briefly, where, if Murray said this, and then he said this, and then he said this, and finally he said this. Well, there are ways that you can get around that. And I think one of the things that can be very helpful in chapter 2 presents to us are these verbs that are really useful, and I use them all the time, for writing, introducing other people's viewpoints. And I think, as the authors put out, that with this academic writing, Murray isn't simply saying things. He's asserting, he is arguing, he insists, maybe he observed this in his life. And so these verbs, which are on pages 40 and 41 in the textbook in chapter 2, are going to be very helpful for you. So when you introduce a summary, when you're summarizing Murray's work, Murray complains that too many people are going to college. So making sure that the action verb that you're using is capturing the author's voice, capturing the author's emotions and the author's intent. Okay, again, based on the fact that as Graff and others are telling us here, authors at this level simply aren't saying things. They're doing something more. They're advocating for. They're calling for this. Okay, make sure that you use some of those verbs when you're introducing summaries, and then also when you introduce quotations. Okay, and so just kind of in conclusion with this piece of it, the summary piece of it, writing a good summary means not just representing an author's view. This is on page 37 in the last paragraph, accurately, but doing so in a way that fits what you want to say, the larger point you want to make. So what does that mean? Well, you've got to be able to tie pieces from that writing of Murray's into your response. So you're bringing in relevant components of Murray's work and integrating them into your response. Okay. All right, so that is it for chapter 2. I'm going to move on to chapter 3 here, and I'm going to go down the page here, and then I'm going to jump back to Canvas in a couple minutes, but let me just do that now. I'll show you out in Canvas here. Again, this is, I'll go back into it because it's been a few minutes since I jumped in here. This is located right here, some helpful starting documents. I put the Quoting Effectively page in there, and what I did is I put a visual in here, which I think is very helpful. And so I'll start by just saying this, what's the issue with just throwing a quote into your paper, to maybe fill some space, or just dropping a quote in and not doing anything, not giving it any framework. Well, oftentimes you can understand as the writer how that quote fits in with your work, but we have to be very explicit. And so we have to be very explicit in explaining, this is why I'm using this quote. Okay, and there's a nice kind of model to use for that. And that's what is on that page that I'm going to jump back out to. But this first slide here, so in reference to what I was talking about a moment ago, never assume a quote speaks for itself. That's why you must always include an explanation of what the quote means to you and or why you're using it in your paper. Okay, so Graf and Birkenstein and Durst refer to this. They make reference to it. It was stated by another author, the hit and run quote, meaning you're writing and then you drop a quote in and then you take off. And there's a nice visual of that on page 46 in the textbook, and there's a big heading at the top, don't be a hit and run quoter. And that's what this is all about. You got to give some kind of frame of reference for using the quotation. Okay. So we also had to make sure that the quotes that we're using are relevant. Okay, it's not good to just throw random quotes in just to kind of fulfill the paper's requirements or add extra padding, or hey, I was required to use a quote in this paper, so I'm dropping one in. The quote can really help your writing, and it can really help your argument overall. Okay, so build your I say argument around what they say. Perfect. Okay, that's really what this is all about. Building your I say argument around what they say. And that is really a good framework for integrating a quote into your paper. So let me jump back out here. And so how do we do this? What is this framework? What is the model? Well, there's this model that exists, and it's made reference to in the textbook and in many other places on the internet. If you do a search for the quote sandwich, basically you're going to get some similar model as what you see here with the explanation, which is, they'd vary, of course. This is kind of taken from a few different sources here. So the opening, the top slice of bread, we got to provide some kind of frame of reference. So again, this is in relation to, instead of just dropping a quote in and then moving on, you got to provide the framework. This is the framework where there's three pieces to this. It is the top slice of bread. We're using this bread as the visual, the analogy. Top slice of bread is the opening. So that is the top slice of bread. Who said it? Charles Murray. Who is he? This is tell us something about the author. Charles Murray, a prominent author, blah, blah, blah. Choose words accurately. Reflect the tone or attitude of the author. Again, this is where you can go back to those action verbs. So Charles Murray, and then, who was Murray? Well, I'm going to let you figure that out for yourselves, but you can find that out. He was a Brady scholar. He was an author. So you could say, Charles Murray, a Brady scholar, wrote on blah, blah, blah. He argued that. Okay, and here comes your quote. The middle piece is all the stuff in the sandwich. So this is the main part of the sandwich. But you couldn't have the sandwich without the top piece of bread and the bottom piece of bread. The main part of the sandwich is the quote itself. That's the actual quote. Make sure that you use quotation marks. And then this is not actually a link. I did link it, but when I put it in a picture, it's not linked. You can type that in the URL and it'll take you to the same place that is here. This is the link for more details about quoting, and I'll jump out there in a second after we go down through this bottom one. So that's the quote itself. Okay, so instead of just dropping in the quote, remember you're going to provide an opening, who is the author, something about the author, and then choosing your words, using those action verbs. He insisted that, and then quotation marks the quote. Okay, so then you end the quote, and now you have to kind of tie it up. So the next sentence should be a sentence tying it up. What is the author saying in your own words? What does the quotation mean in your own words? You don't have to answer all of these, but you should address at least one of them. Why is it important to your argument? Okay, how does it support your point or your argument? Okay, again, you don't have to answer all these, but this is how you're going to tie it up. So you're going to bring it in. Who is Murray? A little bit of something about him. Argued that. Then the quote itself, and then you're going to end the quote, and then you're going to tie it in, explain it a little bit more in a sentence of how it relates to your paper, your argument. You can go longer than a sentence. Certainly you can do that. But this is the good framework for quoting. Okay, so I'm going to jump out here just real quick, and I don't want to run out of time here. We're almost wrapped up with this piece, and I'm going to talk about the paper itself. This is the link that I posted down there in the Canvas site. This gives you some kind of APA basic citation stuff, and keep in mind, I believe the majority of the class is APA, but I'll post some MLA stuff out there as well. I think Chicago, I think we have one Chicago student in the class. This APA was changed October of 2019 to reflect the APA 7th edition. Okay. If you're writing for a class and they're required to use the 6th edition, you can link back to that here. There are some minor changes. I haven't gone through and looked at all the changes between the 6th and the 7th, but I looked at some of them, and I did not note any that are right on this page here. A couple of minor changes, but here we go down here to the quotations. This is the stuff that I posted right out here. That's all down here. So if you're going to quote, this is how you do the parenthetical in-text citation. If the quote, it's a longer quote, it's meaning 40 words or more, then this is how you do the longer quotations. Okay, put this in here for you for a reference. Now you will be required to provide one quote with your paper. And I think that's all I wanted to talk about with chapters 2 and 3. So that's chapters 2 and 3. And then I'm going to spend the rest of the time here, maybe 5 minutes, maybe less, talking about the paper itself. So jump back out here to the Home tab. And I just want to kind of go over the writing assignment, some of the details. This is your first writing assignment. Details will remain the same for all of these. You will submit this paper typed out, following the style according to the style that you're using. If you're using APA, make sure you follow exactly, from required fonts, making sure that you have a title page. Now, the only thing that you're not going to do with APA is you're not going to create an abstract. So again, no abstract for this first paper. We're not going to get into writing the abstract until the third and final writing assignment. Okay, the third is the final writing assignment, where you will be required to create an abstract. For this first one, I'm looking for a few things that you can understand your style. So you can understand the general format and the layout of the paper with the margins, APA, that you have a title page and what needs to go on the title page, and that with APA you have a running head and what that running head is and how it's formatted in the header, the spacing, the parenthetical in-text citation. So when you quote something, that you can quote it correctly according to your style, whether that be APA, MLA, or Chicago. I don't think we have any others in this class. So that's really important. That's all stuff that I'm looking at, and it's going to be weighted heavily and graded heavily. The other things are what I went over here in this video, the beginning part of this video, that you can effectively summarize. Okay, that you can bring a quotation into your work, and that you can frame that quotation correctly, that you can integrate the use of the templates from the textbook into your writing. You can pick any templates that you want, but I'm looking for examples of a couple of templates. So make sure that you integrate those, and then also that you have a thesis statement, and that thesis statement follows that kind of model of the textbook. It's Murray claims this, I claim this, or Murray believed this, I agree because of this. You are making your thesis statement related to the they say, I say model. Okay, so make sure that you understand here, again, this essay is due on the 19th, 3 to 5 pages. You're going to summarize the author's ideas using paraphrases and quotations. I definitely want to see both of those. I'm not going to tell you how many you have to have, but just keep in mind, I think the key point here is that the summarization and the quotations should help lend to that discussion, to that back and forth, to the true of hearing your voice as well as Murray's voice. Okay. You can use as many or as little as you want, as long as you're not over summarizing again or under summarizing. So you got to find that balance. I definitely need to, it's not a strict opinion paper. It's not a I think this or I believe this. It's not a rambling of our own ideas, and it should be academic in nature. It should be using the models of the they say, I say to create your thesis. And it also should cite your source. Now, you're probably only going to be using one source. Cite it here. Okay. Now, cite it as best as you can, because what we're going to do after this paper, I want to see where everybody is, but I will tell you this. This is a work in an anthology. Okay, so you're going to cite this in your style. It's a work in an anthology. It's not a chapter book. It's a work in an anthology. The first part of the book is a chapter book, but the second part, with all the readings collected and put together, it's an anthology. Okay, so make sure that you do a little bit of research. If you're struggling with that, I can help you out with it. I will not dock points if it's not cited correctly on the references or works cited or bibliography page based on your style. The majority of you are going to have the references page, but make sure you create a reference page. You're going to probably have one entry unless you use other sources in your paper, which you are not required to do for this first paper. Okay. As I said, I'm going to have office hours on Tuesday, tomorrow, from 9:30 to about 3, maybe after. So if you want to come in and talk to me about the paper, please do. Academic Hall 221. I will accommodate you, since it was my error today in mixing my schedule up and I missed class. And again, I do want to apologize for that. Make sure that if you can, I have room for you to come to my Wednesday section of the LIBA 301 class. We are on the identical schedule as your section. So what we're going to cover in class today, which is much of what I just went over here in this lecture video, and then I was going to get students to work together to answer those questions that I sent out to you earlier. Feel free to come, please. And I mean that. The other students definitely won't mind. I'm sure they'll enjoy it as I would. We'll have fun with it. So if you're able to make it in, it's the same classroom that our class is held. It is Wednesday from 2 to 2:50. Okay, that's all I have for now. Thank you so much for listening to all this. And again, I'm hoping that you can accept my apology for the mix-up earlier today. Okay, that's it. Have a good night, everybody. And I'm just an email or a text away if you have any questions. Take care.